Chapter 7 of the Epistle to the Romans is a very important element in the completely context of this book of the Bible, especially because we can never consider this chapter isolated from the rest of the epistle. We already have going through the first 6 chapters, and in this way, we need to add all this information that we have considered to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is a very extremely difficult chapter. There are several interpretations, even different kinds of speculation about Paul, how he understood the gospel, how was his relationship to law. What we are going to consider will be a biblical examination of this chapter, as we have done it in the past, but inside of the historical and doctrinal context of chapter 7. So we wish to request the guidance of the Lord by this study, and I hope that everybody with solemnity and reverence consider the content of this chapter. So from verse 1 through verse 3, we found an analogy. So Paul introduced this chapter with a very well-known situation by the situation regulated by the law in the Old Testament, and is the law of marriage. And let us read this Bible text to understand why it's presented here and which is the relationship with the subjects that we have considered from chapter 1 until chapter 5, basically justification by faith. Chapter 6, our previous chapter, is the combination and the link between justification and sanctification. And this chapter introduced a new perspective that will lead us to a new dynamic of understanding Christian experience in the rest of the Epistle to the Romans. So let us read verse 1 through 3. Now, ye not brethren, for I speak to them that know the law, how that the law had dominion over a man as long as he liveth? For the woman which had a husband is bound by the law to her husband, so long as he liveth. But if the husband be dead, she is loose from the law of her husband. So then, if, while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she is not adulteress, though she be married to another man. So that is the law of the husband, as it is presented here in chapter 7. And the important element here is connecting law with death and belonging to a specific unity. So the analogy basically present that is a law, is the law of marriage, and both partners are connected by this commitment that willingly and freely are a common agreement. Now, this commitment need to stay and is without expiration until the day of the death of any of the partners, partakers of this commitment. And here we have 2 moments. When the 2 partners are alive, is only one law that regulated both of them. When one of the partners pass, is another concept of law. So when both of them are alive, they belong together, they have a commitment, and this union cannot be dissolved. Is clearly expressed here. When one of the partners die, is the moment that the partner that remain alive is free, is set free from this commitment by the fact that the commitment is broken by death. So here the concept of law, unity, freedom, and death are interconnected. And Apostle Paul used this example as an analogy. Which is the role of law in our relationship with God? And it's very interesting when we decodify these symbols presented here, that a wife is a woman is a symbol of the church, and God is Jesus is the husband of the church. So this symbolic background understanding is presented here. So we move from the literal concept of the law of marriage to the spiritual law of marriage. So law divided or law united. And these two elements are extremely important in the understanding of law in the plan of salvation. Marriage is a commitment and is regulated by law, is in a code of law, clearly mentioned by Paul in clear reference to the Old Testament. And it's also evident that he speaks, as his own word says, to the people that know the law. So he's speaking in a direct reference to the book of Moses that clearly describes this marriage commitment, and so-called, we have here the law of her husband, okay? So law regulated the submission or the freedom, the union or the separation. And that is very important to understand in this specific context, because it's death. Death is the element that allow a change of the commitment based on the legal code. That is consistent with the law of marriage. And we will see how exactly in the same way is consistent also with the law of God and the law of sin. And both of them are regulated by death and change of circumstances, from submission to freedom, from unity to separation. So let us go to verse 4, and we will find again this concept of death that we already mentioned in chapter 6, an element of a clear distinction between the two main phases of our Christian life. Let us read it. Verse 4 of Romans 7. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. So we have here two masters, and we have the human beings, the human race as a whole, between these two masters. And here is saying that the only element that changed the condition of belonging or ownership or property is death, as in the analogy of the law of marriage. So spiritually here is presented that this change of belonging, change of ownership is based in three main elements: is death, resurrection, and fruit. And that is a correlation, that is the connection between cause and effect. So in chapter 6, we have a study that only the spiritual death to sin is what enables us to have a resurrection by the power of Jesus Christ, practiced in himself as a real example of overcoming sin and raising up to a new life, to a newness of life. This concept we already mentioned in previous chapters. But it's not only the termination of a period of our life, need to be a regeneration. And this regeneration is not complete if they are not tangible results. And that is the reason why this Bible text speaks to us about to bring forth fruit unto God. So these three elements are consecutive and they are interconnected in our experienced life. So if somebody realize that our present condition is a disqualification for salvation, it's only one option. In order to break ownership from the previous owner, in this case Satan and sin, death need to take place. That is the only element of dissolution of any previous commitment. And that is presented to us by the plan of salvation. Jesus needed to die in representative way for the sins of humanity as a whole, even if he didn't commit any sin. But in representation, he took that over him and he laid down his life in order to take it again to a new dimension of existence. So this same concept is presented here. So we have death, we have resurrection, and we have fruit. If we don't have all three in the correctly chronological order, something is going wrong in the completely process. And we will see which elements disturb or distortionated the process. And the answer is in verse 5 and 6 of Romans 7. And that is the opposite reactions between flesh and spirit. And let us read this Bible text because it's very, very important. For when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins, which were by the law, did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So we have here to be in the flesh, to be in the spirit. So it's the same human being in two different dimensions, based unique and absolutely on the flesh, and that is considered that is the motions of sins that give fruits, but unto death. And then we have the other dimension of existence, as is the newness of a spirit, in contrast with the oldness of the letter. So there are two clear comprehension of the situation of the humankind. We can know our condition based only in the letter, and that is considered the oldness of the letter. So that is the past, that is the literal understanding, that is only the form. If you remember, Paul used the same idea in previous chapter, or the new one that is not materialized but is a spiritual newness. And both of them have results, both of them have fruits, and it's a change of service. And all the time, Apostle Paul emphasized these two phases, that this can be complementary, even contemporaneous, or completely separated in humanity. And we will see now that this existence in the flesh and the existence in the spirit need to be transformed in order to achieve a higher level of religious experience. But even before that is a very important element that provoke this transition. And we find it in verse 7 and 8 of Romans 7. And verse 7 say, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Verse 7, but sin, taking occasion by the commandment, brought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law, sin was death. So here is an element that changed completely the concept and don't allow the consolidation of sin in the human being. And that is the law. Because here is saying that by the law is the knowledge. And it's clearly mentioned the last commandment that say, you shall not covet. So Apostle Paul became very clear in this point. So if the law don't exist, covetousness will be not a sin. If it's not a specific declaration that covetousness is a sin. So the law has divine origin. It's a spiritual concept. Okay? So if we covet, if we desire something that don't belong to us, but if from somebody else, and in our mind we wish, we intensively desire this kind of object, reputation, knowledge, or whatever may be, you name it, is condemned by the law. So the sin become a sin because the law exists. And our recognition of sinful condition, activating this kind of attitudes, declare us in open contradiction with the law of God. So the element that describe what is sin, and at the same time condemn and lead the implementation of the law to death because of sin is the law. So law, sin, and death, this triple connection are extremely important here. So clearly, Paul considered that law is absolutely necessary so that the sinful nature of men will be abhorred. Because without the knowledge, people will think, it's okay, everybody do it, I get benefits from it, which is the problem. But when is the law that say, no, that is wrong, because that and that and that is the fruit of it, okay? So from this moment on, human beings need to take a decision. So the law produced the disturbance in a peaceful, sinful condition without disruption. So the law is giving the knowledge, and at the same time is dead because of the existence of law. So the law don't die. The one that die is the one that transgressed the law. So the law announce, give knowledge, and condemnation at the same time. And that is extremely important for us to understand. Now, which is the role of this knowledge that is given by the law? Because chapter 7 emphasizes that the law is alive. that the law is necessary, and especially describe the functions, the importance, and the characteristics of the law of God. So from verse 9 through 12, we find the knowledge before knowing the law, and the knowledge after knowing the law, okay? So these two moments are extremely important because we already defined the concept flesh and the concept of spirit, and they are the two elements where human being is pendulating. Now, the law is the one that regulated this kind of pendulation and balance. Let us read it. For I was alive without the law once. But when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it slew me. Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just, and good. So the law is not only necessary to enlighten us, because Paul was a Jew by birth. So when he say here, for I was alive without the law, once, at least he was not conscious about his sinful nature. He felt completely justified, completely perfect. He was a Pharisee. He know the law, and he feel righteous by himself, by the letter. And in this concept, he say, I was without the law because I didn't realize the transformation by spiritual knowledge. And here is the key element in this point, because say, when I really realize what is the spiritual concept of the letter of the law, is saying sins revive. I realize I have sins. I have a sinful nature. I am not perfect. I am far from perfection. So the spiritual understanding of the law produces in us an awareness and a clear consciousness about our real condition. And then we realize who we are and which is a natural condition. But here is the thing. Exactly because the law condemns, in some human reactions, we find that sin take occasion and deceive me, and by it slew me. Because when we fall into the temptation and a sin become a transgression, hidden or open transgression, we are confronted with the law. But then we feel slow. We feel completely, as is here, deceive me, the sin, and by it slew me. So the law don't give us hope. It's no hope in the law. The law say what is wrong and clarify that, and that's it. And sin appear as really is. But here the point is that even if give the impression that the law is only condemning or transferring knowledge, we find here three very important attributes. So here is a uplifting of the concept of law, because it's saying it's holy, it's just, and it's good. It's holy because it's the revelation of the character of God. And that is the expression of the pure truth in God. So the law is holy because God himself is holy. It's just because clearly define what is right and what is wrong. And it's no doubt about that. And it's good. It's good for us because we need it. We need to have this clear separation and clear definition, what is right and what is wrong. So the knowledge of the law about what sin is not only a linear consequence, it's a plural reaction. So to know the law compare us with these high triple attributes that God is displaying in front of us by the law. If we consider the two tables of the law, 4 directly and connected with our relationship with God, and 6 with our relationship with fellow men, proof that following these commandments, goodness, kindness, peace, good harmony between humans will be the result of it. So it's not only the fact that knowledge, condemnation is revealed, but also it's a transferring of attributes that bring a higher level of spirituality in human beings. But here is another element that Paul presented is verse 13 and 14. Good wins over evil. And that is very interesting because the law is a declaration of war against sin. Because it's clearly saying that is sin. If you do that, you are transgressing the law. So it's a clear statement about what we are not supposed to do. But at the same time, following these principles by knowledge by letter and living by the Spirit, these bring us to a higher dimension of spiritual understanding. Let us see that. Verse 13 and 14 of Romans chapter 7. Was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. So is the law, because condemn us, produce us something wrong? Never, ever. God forbid that this happen. But sin, that it might appear sin, because with the law is when really we understand what sin is. And therefore we get a new dimension of the existence. Because working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceedingly sinful. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, soul under sin. So, again, we are with the spirit and with the flesh. One more time. So, the law is spiritual and give us the knowledge about what is good. And the acceptance of this promote the rejection to sin. By contrast, and we realize the exceedingly level of sinfulness only by knowing the law as it is. But still emerge a conflict between what we are and what we are supposed to become. And Paul elaborated even further this concept in verses 15 through 19. And that is the real description of this internal conflict. Let us read it. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I. If then I do that which I would not, I consent unto the law that it is good. Now, when then it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwell in me. For I know that in me, that is my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me. But how to perform that which is good, I find not. For the good that I will, I do not, but the evil which I will not, that I do. Maybe we are a little bit confused reading all these Bible texts between what I know and what I not do, what I am supposed to do, but I am still not doing. And this internal conflict that emerge between the flesh, our natural sinful condition, and the level of the spirituality of the law. These are in clear opposition. And when we remember Genesis 3:15, it's the statement of enmity between good and evil. That is a declaration of no commitment and no relationship between good and evil. These need to be completely separated. Here is the problem, that when we receive the knowledge by the law, appear within us a conflict. For example, you begin to give somebody Bible studies, and then, through the reading of the Bible verses, the student realizes, even without saying anything, that, I am not doing right, that is in the Bible, and probably I am doing the opposite. So automatically it's a conflict. I am going to accept what is written, or I am going to stay by my regular habits, customs, or ideas. So the law have an element of disturbance. The law have an element that provoke internal conflict in the human being. Because presented the principles of heaven and the habits, ways of doing things that are not accepted according to the will of God, but belong to our human will, according to our own understanding. And this internal conflict is something very, very important to solve it correctly. Because here is saying to us that this conflict exists by the fact that we know and we still don't do things that are right. So we understand here that is a process between knowing, changing, going through this internal anguish and difficulties between what the spiritual level of holiness, justice, and goodness is expressed by God toward us in His Word, and specifically in the law of God, and what we are is in clear opposition. So this provoke this conflict, this internal struggling, and is even further elaborated, this reality, in verses 20 through 23, and is the comparison between the law of God and the law of sin. And again, it's confirmed that human beings are between these two powers, between these two codes of law, because the law of sin has regulation, which is the regulation to do everything that is against the law of God. That's it. So God say, not images. The law of sin say yes to images. God say, Sabbath is the day. The law of sin say, no, Sunday is the day. So every human being is moving between these two main powers, the law of sin and the law of God. And Paul presented in a very described way. Let us read it. Verse 20 through 23 of Romans 7. Now, if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwell in me. I found then a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. Okay? So, the concept of law is one, but I have two diversifications, and here is presented. The law of sin, and Paul say that is evil, is presented in me. So, in my nature, in my natural condition, evil is the dominant power. And we need to understand that we are not good by nature, that we don't try in a natural or a spontaneous way to be good. We learn to be good because we are not good by nature. And if we believe that, we are deceiving ourselves, because the principle that is presented here is that evil is the dominant trait in our behavior as humans. And is a law in my members. So I have this instinct, these traits, these inclinations, these propensities that are evil. Things that clearly are against everything that God had stipulated and defined as good. And that is called the law of sin. Because it's a regulation, it's a way of life, it's a attitude, a behavior, it's a code of conduct, and it's called the law of sin. So we have that. That is without doubt part from us, and it's clearly is presented with me. Now, we are not abandoned in this condition, because then we have a higher aim to follow, and that is called the law of God. And what is that? The law of my mind. The Lord worked through knowledge and give us the capability of understand by the influence of the Holy Spirit. And that is the law of mind. We are still in verses 20 through verse 23, okay? And this law of mind that is teaching us what is right, what is, by contrast, evil, is the law of God. And every one of us, every single second of our life, need to take a decision. What kind of law to follow? The law of sin that we have in a natural form, that is within us, and is the law of sin, or the law of God. We don't have the power to do it by ourselves, but we have the stretched hand of the salvation by Jesus Christ. And Paul went through this experience, and that is the way how the conclusion of this devastating description of our reality is presented in verse 24 and 25 at the end of chapter 7. And it's an expression of thankfulness for the release. It's an exclamation of happiness for the freedom that God provided for us. And let us read it. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of his death? So who can release me from this law of sin? Who? Now is the answer, verse 25. I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, with the mind, I myself serve the law of God, but with the flesh, the law of sin. So we have here physicality and spirituality combined in one body and in one mind, in one human being. So the law shows us who we are and show us what we are supposed to do. But we need Jesus Christ in our life, because he's the one that provides the support, the example, the assistance, the guidance to move from the law of sin to the law of God that is good, that is holy, and is just. But we don't possess these attributes by nature. But we need to have this thought. This need to dominate our mind. This need to be the deepest wish of our life. And this expression of Paul is very dramatic. It's really impressive when he say, oh wretched man that I am. So he achieved the completely knowledge of his desperate condition. Even if he was before a Pharisee, and according to him, perfect according to the law, who can be better than me? Now, this encounter with Jesus changed completely his understanding about his nature, about who he was. And now he say, so how I can move from the letter to the spirit? Because what he had was the letter, but not the understanding of the letter according to the spirit. So to go to this newness of life, we need Jesus Christ in our life. He's the only one that empowers us to move from be submitted to the law of sin to be now under the law of God. And may the Lord help us that this become a reality in our life, is my wish and prayer. Amen.